Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. I hope and trust that you are all well. Before I get started, I would like to give a very special shout out to the reformed members of Back to Ashes. Lisa Radford, Ashley Miles, Interscare Wifey, Tina Mead, Stephanie McLaren, Corpse Lover, Gwen Haley, Mana Ash, Normie DW, Chrissy Elias, Cindy Cleveland, Patty's niece, and Samantha Place. The rest of the Back to Ashes membership family can be seen right here on the screen. If you would like to become a member of Back to Ashes or buy me a coffee as a thank you, all of that information can be found in the description below. Now, with all of that being said, it is time to go back to ashes. For when we arise from the ashes, we are a bigger, brighter, stronger, and happier person in the morning. Sit back, relax, kick back, grab a snack, or tuck in and get warm, and prepare for this dose of vocal melatonin entitled True Creepy Encounters. As soon as this introduction ends, an ad will play. I'll read the first story an ad will play, and after that there will be no more ads within this video. So, a couple of days ago, I was headed into the grocery store and waited on a car to pass so I could cross. Well, as he was driving by, very slowly, I saw he had a digital camera in his hand, and he snapped a picture of me. The flash went off. The window was down and everything, like he was fully prepared to do this and did it many times before. I very audibly said, "What the f-?" And by the time I realized what happened, he had driven away. It sufficiently freaked me out to a point where I asked all of my female friends if they had experienced anything like that before. Of course, all of them had a different but equally creepy encounter with a man, because why wouldn't they? I feel like women are constantly put into uncomfortable situations because a lot of men just can't act like women are actual human beings. I'll be staying away from that store for a while. A few days ago, I came home from work and spent some time playing with my kids in the front yard. I live in a typical suburban with very little crime. At about 8:45 p.m., it was pretty dark and it was time for them to go to bed, so we started collecting frisbees, balls, toys, etc. At some point, my daughter entered the garage and I went after her. My son, 11 years old, remained outside on the driveway by the sidewalk. It must have been 10 to 15 seconds that I was out of sight when a dark car appeared out of nowhere and stopped right by my mailbox, just feet away from my son. I was distracted in the garage and had not seen this. I came out of the garage, and when the driver saw me, he accelerated and took off at high speed. It was all very quick. Why would he stop when he saw my son alone and then escape when he saw me? Was he just lost, or was he trying to snatch a kid? I don't want to be paranoid, but TV is full of true crime shows with people saying this had never happened before in our town. So, I work in retail, and due to this, have had a few weird encounters with middle-aged men. The most recent, however, really shook me and was unexpected. A man around 70 walks into the shop on his phone. He's in a suit, so already was overdressed for the shop, and he just gave me weird vibes. He was on the phone talking to someone and browsing around. He made a beeline for me. I was sorting something on a shelf and expected him to ask for help with something, but as he walked within earshot, I heard, "And she's got the most gorgeous long hair." Yeah, it's lovely and auburn, and a long play that the inner boy inside me is dying to pull, but I think she'd get mad. It literally made my hair stand up on end. I walked directly to the staff room and pretended like I was just making coffee. Came out after he left and told my male colleague, who was horrified and asked if I was okay. I have one that calls me precious in the creepiest voice, and another would come in every shift I work and stay for hours. He also found out my birthday and made me this little jar waterfall thing that was engraved with my name and love from a weird nickname he'd given himself. So you could say, I definitely experience some creepy encounters every single day. This happened about 20 years ago when I was in high school. I was up north at the family cabin and decided to go ATVing by myself. I rode out onto some state land on some trails and ended up on a dirt road, usually used primarily by ATVs, but some cars, particularly DNR cars, would use it too. I rarely saw other people or vehicles when I was back there though. As I was passing an area with a turnoff where people often, unfortunately and illegally, dump trash, I saw an empty pickup truck parked by the side of the road. Because of the aforementioned trash dumping, and since certain types of hunting are allowed on the land, it was rare, but not super weird, to see a car parked there. However, as I drove by, I saw an old man walk slowly out of the woods, carrying a large shovel over his shoulder. As soon as he saw me, he started to stare intently at me. Thoroughly creeped out, I sped up as fast as my four-wheeler would go to pass him, and he continued to stare at me for at least as long as I could see him. He was gone by the time I had turned around and came back by the same road. To this day, I can't figure out why he had a shovel. If he was dumping trash, there would be no reason to bury it. Any theories? In my late teens and early 20s, my friend and I were out cruising. I know I'm dating myself. It was early to mid-fall in SoCal, so not too cold to have the windows open to smoke. Heard a man yelling at someone and started looking around. We saw a young woman walking down the street, hugging her arms to herself. While it wasn't too cold, it was too cold for bare feet and a spaghetti-strap top. We pulled the car, which was a two-door, to the side and asked if she needed a ride. She said yes, and so I opened the door to pull up the seat back and let her crawl in. As she turned toward me, she had a huge butcher knife in her hand. I slammed the door shut and we took off and never offered a ride to anyone ever again. P.S. We did call the cops and let them know so they could check it out. Here's an edit for clarity. It was a two-seater, so I opened the door to pull my seat up so she could get in, but stopped when I saw the knife, pulled the door shut, and my friend took off. She had not gotten in yet. A few years back, I just got off from my shift late at night and my car was low on gas. I stopped at the first gas station I saw and took the exit towards it. The convenience store was closed and a few lights were on outside. I felt a creepy vibe but didn't think anything more of it and decided to get out of my car to pump gas. I looked around at my surroundings at all times while pumping gas, and there was nothing strange to be found, but I was still a little nervous. I finished pumping my gas and got into my car. I locked all of my doors and was ready to drive off. Out of nowhere, a random lady drove up, then blocked half of my car and immediately got out of her car, asking for me to roll down my window, and begged to use my phone because she had an emergency and her phone wasn't working. I had a really bad feeling about her, so I kept all my doors still locked, and I did not roll down my window. I remember I froze up a little and stared at her for a bit, then broke out of it. I then told her that I couldn't help her, then went around her car and sped onto the highway home. It dawned on me on my drive home that if I was just a few minutes late into finishing pumping my gas and that the random lady drove up to me while I was still outside my car, that something bad could have happened to me. I wasn't sure what her intentions truly were, but I'm just glad to have trusted my instincts, and that my timing was quick enough for me to get into the car and drive away from her. I now never go to a gas station late at night again on my own. I still get heavy chills thinking about it, and I'm glad I was able to avoid everything about that situation that could have gone bad had I been a few minutes late on getting into my car. This could have gone bad with myself, but I wasn't going to stick around and find out. This was a while ago for me, but it always creeped me out. I also don't know if I'm just being paranoid, so that's why I'm writing this now. It was sometime during winter, and I was getting home at around 12:30 a.m. I stopped at a 7-Eleven to get a drink on my way home, and there was a teenager sitting outside. He was wearing a big hoodie and shorts. That was odd for winter. He said hey to me on my way in, and when I came back out, he started talking to me. He asked me for a ride. His story wasn't very clear, but from what he was explaining, a friend dropped him off and he had no way of getting home. He also said he had moved here recently, so he wasn't familiar with the area and didn't know a lot of people. I tried to ask him if anyone could help him, and he said he had a girlfriend, and he looked her up on Instagram. It seemed like a random account, and he wasn't trying to get help from her. I also recommended calling the police, but he refused as well. My memory is a little blurry, so I don't remember exactly why he refused, but he was also quiet and unclear. He wouldn't give exact reasons or show that much of an incentive to leave, except needing a ride. He wouldn't make eye contact with me either. When I told him I wasn't really comfortable, he acknowledged it and understood, and he wasn't forceful. But to me, it was still really weird he didn't try Uber or the cops, or even walking home. It would have taken a lot of time, but his neighborhood wasn't too far. There was also a car nearby in the parking lot. They had their lights on and didn't leave. I asked him if he tried that car, and he said they were just smoking in there. That was believable, though. And I know loitering isn't allowed, but it was odd he was waiting out in the cold instead of in the store. You'd think the one worker being there that late would let a teenager, but I suppose not. I told him I'd ask my parents because I am young too, and I got back in my car. I felt horrible for him. He seemed like someone from the area, but it was late and cold. I felt like I had to help him. I called my dad and he told me not to do it, so I just drove off. No one followed me or anything. He was young and skinny, so I'm not sure if he'd be capable of something like that, but you never know. So that's why I'm asking here, what do you think? This happened a couple years ago at Pier 1. I frequented the store just to look around on the weekends. On this particular Saturday, as I started walking through, just taking everything in, I ended up back by the curtains. All of a sudden, before I even consciously noticed him there, every alarm bell in my head started going off, and the hair on my arm stood up. I looked to my left, and there was a guy uncomfortably close, also looking at curtains. He made some random remark about the curtains, but I don't remember what it was, as every instinct in my body compelled me to get away from him as soon as possible. I quickly moved away from him, but every new area I went to, he'd appear again, right there next to me. There was zero chance I was going to leave the store at this point and give him the opportunity to follow me out. So I just kept very quickly moving away from him. Every time he tried to engage me with conversation, I just completely ignore him and quickly move. Finally, I just went and stood up near the cashier stand and watched him, thankfully, leave the store. As soon as he left, one of the female employees said to another female employee, "That guy finally left." I asked her, "Do you mean the guy who just walked out the door?" She said, "Yeah, he's been in and out of here a couple of times today, following women around and generally creeping everyone out." I relayed what had just happened to me, and they said that just before he left, they were about to call the police because they got such a weird feeling from him. I will say, this was the first time I've ever gotten that creeped out by a random stranger in an almost instant. Everything in my body screamed, "Get away now." I stayed at the store for a while, after that just to make sure he'd gone. Always, always, always listen to your instincts. This event happened when I was 16. I'm currently 18. But our home had to have some renovations, so the builders tell us the renovation will only take about a month. And we're able to live in an Airbnb that is thankfully in the same neighborhood as us. I take the bus to and from school, and it is a very long walk to the bus stop from this new location. One thing about me is that I have a very poor sense of direction. Even if I have been taking the same road for years, it's still a possibility I will forget the way. So I was lost walking home one day and accidentally found another route on the way to the Airbnb from the bus stop, which added another 10 to 20 minute walk. This is important context to the story. So, one day I'm walking home from the bus stop and I'm cursing myself out because it is minus 20 something and I've accidentally taken the longer route, which is when I first noticed a middle-aged man a good distance behind me. At first, I shrugged it off because he wasn't very close at all, but I began to get concerned because the route I am taking is not a regular one. It's one where you have to cut between houses, etc., and it seems too large of a coincidence. And he is constantly behind me, even on the absurd route I am taking. At this point, I am scared, but I don't want to alert him because it's winter and it is already getting dark out. And I am not strong at all, so my chances of overpowering a grown man are slim to none. I pick up my pace, increasing the already pretty large gap distance between us. So, as soon as I round the corner, there is a fence surrounding the Airbnb, and there is a gate that breaks open in the fence that leads into the neighborhood to where the house is. This is technically the way, but you're supposed to cross the gate. He has not rounded the corner yet. He is still far behind me. So at this point, I sprint like my life depends on it down the sidewalk, and duck under the gate and hide behind the fence. I then climb the porch stairs and peek across the fence. It's a position where I can see the road and sidewalk, but they cannot see me. And he bursts from around the fence, running, probably because the distance between us had grown too large, and stops in his tracks when he does not see me, and pulls out his phone and starts talking, then goes back the way he came. Until this day, I am not sure if it was paranoia or if he genuinely had bad intentions, but I'm still glad that there was such a distance between us, which is the only way I was able to run off unnoticed by him. In 2005, I rented a house in South Florida in the attic. I found a room that had two doors in it. One was a small closet of sorts, and the other led out to the old flat roof they had built to roof over the existing roof. The room was kind of creepy. On all of the finished walls, there was scribbling and scratch marks. When I say everywhere, I mean like suburban graffiti, the small child version. Seemed a bit odd, however. Didn't put much thought into it, though. A little more info on the house. The house, all tile, 4 bedrooms with an office, great pass-through kitchen, even outdoor laundry room. My Florida people will know why that's important. 'Cause it's hot, no extra heat in the house. Giant front and backyard, workshop in the back, and a block wall gated pool for privacy. As soon as we moved in, our first concern was this pool, as we had a 4-year-old daughter who hadn't been taught to swim yet, and our 9-year-old son. So immediately, our parents were concerned. My now ex-wife's mother owned a pool cleaning business and got us a great deal on a child-proof screen for the pool and had it installed. Now, fast forward 6 months. My girl and I were planning not only our wedding, but also trying for our first planned pregnancy. And we soon found out she was pregnant the day after both of our bachelor and bachelorette parties, and just a week before our wedding. So, wedding day comes, we announce our new addition to the family while we have everybody there at the reception, and everybody is overjoyed. We head out the next day on our honeymoon, as planned. We had both never been to Disney World, so our plan was to spend a 3-day weekend there. Unforeseen problems arose, and we ended up at Celebration Hospital. Complications of pregnancy. While we were there, we even found out that we were having twins. Happy and scared, we cut our honeymoon short and headed home. The days coming is where everything just blows my mind still to this day. When we arrive home, of course, we have a great deal of friends and family concerned for our well-being. They stop by, bring dinners in and whatnot. And to our spirit, our neighbors, a little old couple, love them, the Coxes, came to congratulate us on the wedding and bring us a present. While thanking them, they ask about our wedding and our honeymoon. We give the details and tell them we discovered that day at the hospital that we were expecting twins. Both visibly shocked and at the least disturbed, cut short our conversation and left vitally shaken. Now my wife and I were standing there, present in hand, bewildered, shook our heads and wrapped up our night. The next day after I arrive home from work, Mrs. Cox stops by and apologizes for their behavior yesterday, and explains in full detail that the family that lived in our house before us had twins, a boy and a girl. This was shocking in itself, but then proceeds to tell us the little boy had drowned in our pool. The very thought of this still sends shivers down my spine. In the grief that follows such things, they believed they would lock the little girl in the attic in her own little room. I believe it myself after all the children's scribble that was so unexplained in the creepy room in the attic. Needless to say, my wife and I moved our family out of that house immediately. I'll try and keep this short. When I was 10 years old, my parents bought a condemned house to be renovated by us. This would be a year-long process. When it came time to sign papers for the house, the former owner nonchalantly mentions that her brother, that has been in prison for 10 years, is about to get out of prison. His name is Jimmy. She said he had somewhat of a split personality. One moment he was an angel, the next he had a shotgun pointed at your face. We didn't know what to expect, and as a little boy, I was a little nervous about it, and we were locked in the contract as we had already signed the papers. Months had gone by, and we had been working on the house. Then, all of a sudden, one day, we find out the driveway was barricaded, and someone had shit on the front porch. It was Jimmy. He had put all of our construction equipment in the driveway to block us, and then pinched a loaf on our porch. We called the cops, had a restraining order put on him, and didn't really see him for a while. Now, why was he in prison? He and a friend of his got drunk one night. His friend stated that he wanted to kill himself, and then Jimmy said that he would just do it for him. So Jimmy found a stick and stabbed his friend and killed him. But it didn't end there. Then Jimmy poured wax over his friend's eyes, cut him into several pieces, and spread the body parts all over the town we lived in. He also killed someone else out of self-defense in prison. We had finished renovating our house and we're all moved in. Jimmy had not shown up for a while, which is what creeped me out. I shared a room with my brothers. This room was near the front porch. My mind played with me for a solid year. I barely slept because I thought Jimmy was outside my window, just waiting to pour wax over my eyes. A couple more months go by, and Jimmy shows up one day. He wanted to come in and apologize to us for what he did to the house. My siblings and I are standing at the door, watching my dad outside talking to him. My dad said no, of course, and told him to leave. That was the last time we saw Jimmy. He never really did anything to hurt us, but just the thought scared the out of me for the longest time. The bush's eyes. This happened like a week ago, so it's still quite fresh in my memory. I was up in northern Canada camping with a bunch of my cousins and friends. Something we've done every year since I can remember. The trip started off routine, waking up with a sore back from sleeping on a crappy air mattress, spending a bit too much time in the sun out on the lake, only to deal with itching shoulders and feet the rest of the trip, and hanging out by the fire into the early hours of the morning. It's strange. Although camping can be one of the most uncomfortable things ever, I've always felt grounded and safe whenever I'm by that water. That is, until what happened the last night we were there. My cousins, buddies, and I, the whole gang, would explore the campground every year to see if there were any new changes or upgrades to the old 1970s amenities. This year, we were pleasantly surprised to see that a brand new picnic shelter had been built on the opposite end of the park, maybe a 15-minute walk from our site. This thing was outrigged with a dozen or so outlets, 6 brand new picnic tables, and a great view of the beach leading into the lake. We decided that the last night of our trip, we'd place some cards under a crudely hung flashlight at around 1 a.m., milking our last hours in the great outdoors. Being in our early 20s, we decided to indulge in some libations before playing the games, just to spice it up a bit and get the creativity juices flowing. We'd brought along a handful of beers each, too, keeping a watchful eye for park rangers looking to spoil some innocent fun with a citation. Those beers flowed right on through me, and within half an hour of being at the shelter, I had to take a piss. So I got up from the table we were sitting at and moved around the side of the structure, out of the dim lighting and into the pitch black of the night. The only light around me was the moon's reflection off the perfectly still water, just enough for me to make my way onto the little trail we'd taken to get to this pretty secluded area. I unzipped my fly and began letting it fly. That's when I saw it. I did maybe a triple take to make sure I wasn't just high and tipsy, but oh no. Right there in front of me, maybe 15 feet away, was a pair of human eyes glaring out of the bushes right at me. I knew I wasn't tripping out because even in that short amount of time, my eyes had begun to adjust, and there I could see the faintest outline of the figure the eyes belonged to, shifting ever so slightly and rustling some leaves. I didn't know what to do, and keep in mind, I'm like mid-piss, so I just blurred out, "Get your eyes off my..." Because apparently that's the first thing that came to mind. What the... I don't know. Then, two things happened at once. The figure started emerging from the bushes towards me, and I heard the quick footsteps of my buddies behind me running over to see what the hell I was talking about. That must have been all whatever that thing in the bushes needed to see, because it took off back into the woods. My friends were quite concerned because I'd been the one telling everyone to shut up and keep quiet all night. And now I'm yelling out loud something about my... I told them what I'd seen, and they believed every word because one of them had heard bushes moving earlier when he went to take a leak, but thought nothing of it. So, to the guy or thing or whatever the hell you were that was peeping in the bushes up north at 2 in the damn morning, let's never, ever, ever meet again. This happened a couple of years ago now. I was in an extremely unhealthy relationship at the time, and after one of my partner's fits of rage, I went out for a night drive to clear my mind. I was 22 at the time, living in a small town in rural Alberta. Now, if you know anything about Alberta, you know that a lot of our residents are redneck types with huge jacked-up trucks sporting massive aftermarket bumpers and headlights that can probably see clear to Mars. Now, I'm not a tiny girl. I grew up training in MMA, and I'm damn near 6 feet tall. But I drive a tiny silver sedan, so me and my tiny car made our way out to the local fishing pond. It's also a bit of a lover's lane, but it was pretty much deserted at the time aside from one other car in the parking lot. I pulled in, hugging tight to the curb to put as much space as I can between myself and the other occupant of the lot. There's a chain guardrail type thing in the immediate right of my car, as well as in front of me, but I wanted to keep my splotchy face to myself while I texted my best friend about the fight I just had with my partner. As I'm sitting in my car, doors locked and ignition off, I see a vehicle coming down the road. It's important to know that this parking lot is at the top of a T intersection, and there's not much to do in my hometown other than drive around aimlessly, so I didn't think much of it. That is, until the vehicle pulled in behind and slightly to the left of me, blocking my vehicle in. I was still upset and borderline ready to end myself anyway, so although it freaked me out, I didn't do anything about it. I just stayed in my seat, doors locked, texting my friend. After about 20 minutes of this, what I could now tell was a massive truck with an iron cross bumper. You can look it up, they're very distinctive. Sitting behind me with its goddamn lights from hell shining into my car, they drove off. I paid no more thought to them after that. Once I felt calm enough to go back home, I started my car and went to put it in reverse. Remember how I said the lot I was in was at the top of a T intersection? Well, all of a sudden, these lights come on from just up the road behind me. I pull onto the shitty gravel road and start making my way back towards town. And the truck followed. I drove slowly and calmly, and they got so close behind me that they nearly clipped my car with their bumper. And they kept backing off and pulling in close again, like a cat playing with a mouse. I completely ignored them and continued to drive normally until I made it to the turn into town, where they decided to finally f*** off in the other direction. I've never felt that kind of fear before, or since. Not really sure what was going on or what their intentions were. I don't really care to find out, either. Alright, here's some background. I live in the UK, and my flat is located next to a pretty large forest. There is a path which used to be a railway track, but has now been converted into a cycle and walk path, which links into the city. To preserve the heritage of the railway track, some of the old train stations still exist on the platforms, although the buildings itself have been converted to an open space to walk around in. The path is fairly lit up except the train stations. Story time. Last year, my friends and girlfriend had visited me over the weekend to party and have fun since we live at least an hour and a half hours away. My roommate, who was also from my hometown and friends with the group, suggested we should have a campfire. Now being a forest, I didn't want to alert neighboring flats and potentially get into trouble. The abandoned train station had good coverage from watchful eyes, and it was safe enough to do a campfire. It even had a pit from someone else doing a campfire before. My roommate and I checked out the place prior to our friends arriving. So, here we were, at 11 p.m. We picked a time where there would practically be no one using the path. We laid our blankets down, started our music, and tried to light our firewood. It just wouldn't light, and we were running out of paper. Suddenly, we heard a voice, although we could not identify where it was coming from. We all went silent, thinking a passerby had heard our music from the path outside the station. After a few minutes of silence, we resumed our activities. 15 minutes later, the voice was more audible and more aggressive. It started off with a grunt, and worse, sounded more closer than we were comfortable with. Who's there? There was a metal sheet in the corner of the station, and my friend said that he saw it moving. We all made a decision to pack up shop and leave as quietly and quickly as possible. One of my friends was visibly upset and wouldn't move. We had to literally drag her out. I turned around and saw a shadow of what I believed was a tall man staring at us. He started quickly walking towards our group. I'd shouted to my group to leg it, and we ran until we reached the streetlights in my housing estate. We were all quite shaken up, and in hindsight, it was probably a bad idea in the first place. My bet is that it was a homeless man and druggie that we disturbed with our fire, but I didn't want to know what would happen if we stayed or had our music too loud to hear him. Mr. Creepy Man, I hope we don't ever meet again. I tend to go running and walk my dog anywhere between midnight and 5 a.m. I vary it for safety. Also, my pup is a new addition to my nightly routine, as I've only had him for a year. I know as a young woman in her 20s it's not smart, but I've been doing it for quite some time. It's where I go to clear my head and feel safe enough. It is, ironically, very unsafe, I suppose. Tonight was another one of my creepy encounters. I've had many over the years. This is my first time writing about this one. I just moved to a new area, and though it should be safer than the inner city, I've been having enough odd things happen to me to make me scratch my head. Tonight, at around 4:45, 5 a.m.-ish, as I'm walking my dog in the neighborhoods across the intersection, a silver Toyota is very slowly driving up behind me. Before it passes, it pulls back and reverses. I assume it's someone parking or pulling into their driveway. At this point, I'd already crossed the street to avoid another oddly idly car, so even as I tried to rationalize it, I was on high alert. To backtrack, originally I'd been walking on the left side. I prefer to walk opposite of the flow of traffic for safety, and crossed to the right because the first car had pulled up, then been idling there for quite some time as my dog and I slowly made our way up the street towards it. I always play it safe this early or late, so I crossed just in case it was a weirdo. As the Toyota reverses, a man steps out of the first car, which is now diagonally from me. He looks at me, looks at my dog, locks his car, and heads across the street away from me. This was a T intersection for reference. I'm not sure if this other car is of relevance. However, as I'm paying attention to this, I'll still note the second car that had reversed into a spot in the street and hadn't moved. No one had gotten in or gotten out. I stay vigilant as there's usually not too much activity in the suburbs around this time, unless it's the weekend and people are partying late. 2 cars on the same street, same behavior, was incredibly odd. I breathed a sigh of relief as the first guy, who had looked at me several times at this point as he crossed the street and right before he got in, finally left into the apartment complex gate. Sometimes I wonder if I look suspicious too, being out so late. I finally make it to the top of the T and go right, and there's only 1 block until a main road. Then from there, I can cross to my apartment. There's usually just a few cars here and there at this time. I made it to the well-lit main street and relax. The second I let my guard down, as if on cue, the silver Toyota pulls past and reverses towards me. Note that before it hadn't passed, just idled behind me, and now he was reversing in front of me. My gut clenches, and I knew it was one of those moments. I've had enough to recognize the feeling and scenario. I go calm. Decisions. I hesitate. He's about 5 to 10 yards ahead. I considered walking past normally and running if things got weird, but decided to trust my gut and cross the street. Just as I check traffic to see if I can cross, he steps out. I consider running again. I see no one coming, not a car in sight. It's a tanned, bald man holding a cigarette. It was particularly strange because rarely have I had people step out of their vehicle to try and do something to me. In my experience, if you ignore whatever is trying to lure you into their car and don't get close, they just drive off. It's why I avoid vehicles in general, to not give a chance of contact. He circled all the way around the car to the sidewalk, looks at me, and then just says, I thought you needed a ride," as if he realized something. It was the way he said it, just like that, not a question. As I'm answering, he's already leaving the curb. No sir." Then he just went back to his driver's side, hops in and drives off. It was just really strange. He said it like a statement and basically barely waited for my response. I wonder what he was planning to do and why he had second thoughts. I'll never stop my nighttime adventures, but one day I won't have any more luck left. The Grim Reaper doesn't like being ding-dong ditched. Quick edit. I'm sorry the timeline of events is jumbled. I wrote this shortly after it happened, and I'm still kind of processing it all. Gather around, folks, as I recall to you the details of the most what the f moment of my life. This takes place sometime around the summer of September 2010. I was about 14 or 15 years old at this time. My family wasn't super financially well off, but my dad managed to pull together a family camping trip to Savannah, Georgia. Though Savannah wasn't home to the most beautiful of beaches, it was a beach that held a lot of sentimental value. I remember camping on Tybee Island many times as a kid. I was over the moon excited to be going back for the first time since I was a much smaller child. And this time, I was getting to bring my best friend. The weekend had never looked more enticing. The trip started off normal. We got to the campsite, and my dad started to set up his tent. My older brother and his girlfriend were just hanging out. My other older brother busy exploring the site. and my friend and I hanging out on the picnic table near the rather small tent. After everything was set up, we were all just hanging out, relaxing, as it was already getting late by this time. Might be worth mentioning that I come from a 420 friendly household, so please refrain from judgment. Anyway, we were just chilling and smoking a little joint when our camp neighbor pops on out from his tent. He must have smelled our ganja, so he came over and introduced himself. We'll call him Dan. He's about mid-50s, around 6 foot tall, give or take an inch or two. About ear-length wazy, greasy-looking gray hair. Kinda made my skin crawl a little, but meh. So Dan comes up and introduces himself and asks to smoke with us. My friend and I didn't partake in the group chat, as we just didn't really give a shit like most teen girls wouldn't. So we just conversed amongst ourselves close by so we could still smoke, but far enough that we wouldn't have to engage in conversation with Dan. I wasn't too worried, as I had my 2 older brothers and my dad there to protect us. And one thing about the middle oldest brother is that he was a wild little shit who would probably kill the guy if he tried anything funny. But regardless, I was still aware of how much Buddy gave me the heebie-jeebies. However, he didn't try anything, so that was cool. Just played guitar with my dad and oldest brother until we all decided to crash. That night, my friend and I decided to sleep on the picnic table. The tent with my dad felt too small, and we felt too cool to share one with him. One of my older brothers was already asleep in the car, and my eldest brother took off with his girlfriend to go sleep on the beach. So we decided, f it, let's sleep on the table. Bad idea. We spent the whole night getting eaten by mosquitoes and feeling like we were being watched. It was horrible. 10 out of 10 would not recommend. We slept in the car the rest of the trip. The next morning, Dan popped up on us again as we were smoking a morning bowl while readying ourselves to go get breakfast. My dad, being the total gent that he is, invites Dan to come along. At this point, he seemed normal enough. Stinky, but nice enough. Never said anything weird to me or my friend, but I could just feel something off about him. But again, I felt safe with my brothers and my dad. I felt like just the appearance of my dad would be enough to make him steer clear of us. My dad's not too tall, but he is fit, covered in tattoos with long hair and several facial piercings. Total metalhead, and despite his big heart, he had the male equivalent of a resting bitch face. So, breakfast started off normal. We're all baked and giggling, enjoying our scrumptious-ass breakfast, when all of a sudden, Dan pipes up. He starts talking about the show Hannah Montana. We all exchange glances like, is this grown-ass man really raving about a tween television series? So we all sit back and listen. Dan goes on about how beautiful Miley Cyrus is, how much he hates the character Oliver, and how cool the character Lily was. We're all looking like, what the when the real dinger gets thrown out there. This guy, this poor delusional man, starts telling us that he's in a relationship with Miley. That when she has a love interest in the show, it's really just a subliminal message that she's sending to him. That her lyrics and her music are for him. We obviously didn't question it because we're all pretty clear that this guy's off his rocker. So what would be the point? So we all just nod our heads and hurry up on finishing our breakfast. Nobody even had to say what we were all thinking, so we just tried to. Kind of shrugged him off if he approached us again. We all caught on as to how weird he was, and everyone just kind of steered clear of him from then on. Later that day, after we digested our food a bit and relaxed and smoked, all that good stuff, we all decided to hit the beach. The part we went to was near a pier and a bunch of shops, so my friend and I decided to wander around and get a little time away from all the testosterone. We roam the shops a little and pick out some cute necklaces and the works, then decide to head on over to the pier. Now, the entrance of the pier has this little gazebo type shit with tables and drinking machines and stuff. So my friend and I decided we were going to plant our little tired asses there and cool off a bit. So, we're chilling there, talking about normal teen shit, when I spot Dan sitting just a couple tables behind ours. My friend was sitting with her back towards Dan's direction, so I quietly let her know that Dan was there watching us and we should skedaddle. So we got up and started heading towards the beach. We get off the pier and make it to the beach and think we're in the clear. We hadn't seen him get up after us. But of course, we were wrong. Not long after entering the beach part of the area, we peeped that he's walking behind us. Not too close, but close enough that it's blatantly obvious that he is intended to following us. So we silently came up with a plan in case he got a hold of us. We agreed that we would jump him if he tried anything. We were two small teen girls, but my friend was a crazy little Gemini, who has also been attending kickboxing classes regularly for years. The girl could roundhouse kick the shit out of him, and he 100% wouldn't expect it. So she made me feel brave and unafraid. The best kind of friend to have in a situation like this. However, as unafraid as I may have been, I still knew our best shot would be finding either one of my brothers or my dad. Fortunately for us, we saw my brother and his girlfriend relaxing on the beach not too far ahead. So we hurried on up to them, and Dan veered off somewhere else. Once we were sure he was gone, we started telling my brother about Dan following us. He was clearly bothered, but just told us to stay near and keep an eye out. Let him know if he says anything weird, and that was that. No idea if he wanted to snatch us up or simply just follow us around. I don't recall seeing Dan again that night or on our last day there. His gear was gone by morning, and we all breathed a sigh of relief because, let's be real. However, sad as it may have been, he was so very clearly mentally ill. Dan was weird, and we were all pretty stoked to spend our last day without him. Our last day was great. We all had a blast, and Dan never came back. So we packed up and waved goodbye to Savannah as we all laughed and discussed all the crazy shit Dan had said on that trip. We could all agree that this seemingly super nice and normal middle-aged man had given us a trip to remember. But wait, there's more. So, after about a week or so of being home, my dad's watching the news when, guess who pops up on the screen? You guessed it. Headlined, Miley Cyrus stalker arrested in Savannah, Georgia after trying to gain access to her studio, or some shit along those lines. But it was 100% him. No mistaking, as they said his name and listed our vacay weekend in Savannah as the time and place of his arrest. And of course, the picture solidified any prior doubts. It was him. So during that weekend, when he wasn't with us, he was actually stalking Miley Cyrus and was arrested for trying to get into the studio or whatever that she was filming at. And that's why he wasn't there that last day. So we decided, screw it, let's Google this guy. Turns out that wasn't the first time he had been arrested for stalking her. Dan had been arrested in a couple different states as he had been following her around the country. He genuinely believed they were in love. We found a video of him on YouTube being interviewed by some news dude. Different incident than the Savannah arrest. Dan was talking about how he was there to see Miley and that he was going to ask her to marry him. He looked so jittery and excited, like someone who was truly excited to propose to the love of their life would be. I think that's part of what weirded me out the most. He really and truly believed it with all of his heart. And that, my friends, is terrifying to say the least. So, there you have it, internet dwellers. The story of my camping trip with the official Miley Cyrus stalker. I changed his name as I'm not certain of the rules as far as naming criminals goes. But a simple Google search should suffice for anyone who's truly curious. As a last thought, I'll leave you with this. I keep wondering why Dan was drawn to my friend and I, and recently, as I relayed this story to a friend, something dawned on me. Hannah Montana, or Miley on the show, was a brunette, and her best friend Lily was a blonde. I was brunette, and my friend was blonde. So what if he saw us and had some weird thought of us being like them or some shit? I don't know. Could be a stretch, but my mind was blown when I thought about it. Anyway, that's about it. I hope you enjoyed my story. It's one I always enjoy telling because it's just so, what the you know? My friend and I are still super close, and it's something that gets brought up at least once or twice a year, either with her or with my family. A memory to last a lifetime for all involved. So at least we have that. So, to Miley Stalker, I seriously hope that neither Miley nor I have to encounter your crazy ass ever again. This happened when I was 14. My family and I lived in a very safe, upper-class neighborhood in a safe city. Our house was right near a local conservation area popular for hiking, canoeing, camping, and observing wildlife. I was always a paranoid kid growing up for whatever reason. Thinking back, it was probably from those sketchy stranger danger ads they would show my classmates and I in elementary school. Those things were very unnerving. My younger brother, let's call him Jules, and I shared a room all growing up. And despite my best efforts to get my parents to build an extension on our place or rejig the layout so I could have my own room, that was still the case that warm June night. It was actually the morning, I guess, probably 3 or 3:30 or so, when I'm woken up from my dreamland by the sound of a voice in my room. Obviously, I wasn't too worried or anything. Sometimes my brother would talk in his sleep or go to the bathroom in the middle of the night and, just like a typical youngest child, failed to be too considerate of his snoozing brother in the bed next to him. This time was different though. I woke up and in a groggy state can make out a terrified expression on Jay's face. I asked him what was up and he looked me dead in the eyes and said, "Oh, someone's being outside." Now, I hadn't checked the time yet, so I just brushed it off, telling him, "Go back to sleep, you're just dreaming." That's when he got louder and more assertive. This snapped me into reality, and I asked him, "What did you just say?" He got quiet and repeated what he said. I didn't know what to do. I was just frozen, laying there, and that's when I heard it. "Help me, I'm being..." coming from directly in front of our house. Jay and my bedroom faced the street, and because it was so warm that night, we left the window cracked open a couple of inches, and so the cries for help traveled to my ears without difficulty. I suddenly sprang up from my bed and told him not to move as I sprinted down the hall to my parents' room. I swung open their door and they both woke up asking what the hell I was doing, waking them up in the middle of the night. I told them, "Someone is being right outside of our house right now." My dad, my hero, didn't even waste a second or question me one bit as he threw some pajama pants on and rushed down the stairs. I'm not the kind of kid who would lie about something like this, as some sort of twisted prank or anything. My mom starts crying and grabs the landline beside her bed to call 911, as she can now hear the faint cries for help, even from the other side of the house. My younger sister woke up from her room too, crying, asking what was going on. We huddled in my room and for the first time peered out the blinds to see what was transpiring on the street below. My mom looked first and seemed confused. Down on the end of our driveway was a man, maybe 25, in his boxers, alone. Then we see my dad flick all the house's lights on and begin walking down the driveway towards him, shirtless, with my Louisville Slugger baseball bat in his hands. The man stares at him, and at this point, a bunch of our neighbors had woken up, and we could see them watching from their doorways. The man then points at the neighbor across the street and yells, "It was you me," to which my dad calmly responds, "What happened to you? Do you need help?" The man then springs up and hits the back windshield of our family van, and my dad says, "If you do that again, I'll break your legs." We hear the police sirens coming down the street now, and 5 cop cars pull up, and after a few minutes, my dad comes back inside. He tells us that everything is fine, that the guy was strung out on heroin and wandered away from his friend's campsite in that conservation area. My whole family was quite shook up, to put it lightly, and nothing like that has ever happened again in our neighborhood. That's one image I'll never forget though. My badass dad walking shirtless down our driveway to stop a potential with a baseball bat. Just over 10 years ago, I was dating my first ever girlfriend. We had just gone public and came out to our parents officially. At the time, I was 15, and she was 16, if memory serves me right. Both of us lived in accepting households and went to an accepting school. However, for whatever reason, when we went public, we had secretly dated for 2 years prior to that. She went fully off the deep end for our final year together. I'll quickly mention that she was really abusive throughout our entire relationship. I had just gotten out of an extremely abusive household, so I had a hard time recognizing the danger I was in. It felt normal, but it got particularly bad this one night when she snapped, I guess. I'm hesitant to attribute her behavior solely to a psychotic breakdown. I think she was just an evil person genuinely. To summarize the lead up to this quickly, she had recently, within about 5 months leading up to this, told me she had 7 souls living within her, all of which hated me. They were all men from the Victorian era, more or less. She lost herself to these men, and as each one emerged, she would abuse me in a unique way. I'm going to give them aliases, even though they're not real. I'm still afraid of her, and them, I guess. Duke liked to choke me in my sleep. Harold hit me. Han would try to cut me with knives when I was sleeping. Thea would ignore me or give me the silent treatment. Gerald would force himself on me in my sleep. Tim would pick apart my appearance and bully me, but Alex was the worst, and the entity I had to deal with the most towards the end. Alex was the present one this evening. He'd play Paranormal Activity and torment me with the creepiest shit you've ever seen. He would sing in the corner of the room in the dark. He would mutter to himself constantly. He would smile at me while saying things like, "You'll die soon," or "You don't have to fear me when I'm unarmed." He was into knives and sharp things. He never self-harmed, but would try to harm me regularly. He also convinced me that if I ever left him, he'd kill me. I was 15. I believed it. You may be wondering at this point where our parents were in all this. My parents had just freshly divorced and custody was being settled. I stayed at my partner's place on the weekends and during some weekdays due to it being safer. Things were so messed up in my own household that it genuinely seemed safer at the time. This is also where my hesitancy comes in with the legitimacy of their psychosis. Whenever their parents were around, they'd snap out of it, literally like a light switch. They could turn the crazy off and on like it was nothing, which makes me think They did this with the intention of harming me, not as a cry for help. Fast forward to the afternoon it happened, the final straw. We were downstairs, Alex, my girlfriend, and myself, watching TV. Their parents were going to be out for the whole day, and upstairs was their older sibling, who was a complete hermit, kept to their room with soundproof headphones on. Well, Alex also hated this person for no real reason. I was sitting at the downstairs kitchen table working on some homework when I hear Alex start humming in the corner. I turn around and ask if they're okay. They do the creepy smile and nod thing. I went into freeze mode and just went back to my homework while keeping a close but discreet eye on them. It always got bad for me when I reacted, but I had a feeling they were about to have a violent outburst. They started walking over to the kitchen, still humming, but there was a shake in their voice that I hadn't ever heard before. I looked up slowly and saw that they were taking a large paring knife out of the knife block. I remember my adrenaline started to kick in, and I looked around for ways to defend myself. To my surprise, they started walking away from me, not towards me. I watched them walk down the hallway and towards the stairs before they exclaimed, "I'm going to kill you." I presumed to their sibling. Something came over me, and before I knew it, I was booking it up the stairs trying to stop them as they started running, knife in hand, up the stairs. I grabbed their pant leg and pulled them down a few steps. We both collapsed as their sibling opened their bedroom door. A ways away, it was a huge house, and asked what was going on. Alex at this point turned around and struck me with the knife, leaving a gash on my arm and shoulder. I retreated back downstairs as they calmly called out to their sibling, "Nothing, just tripped. I'm okay, thanks." I ran to the kitchen downstairs, texted my parents to come get me, and started cleaning and bandaging my arm. Alex returned at this point, and as soon as we made eye contact, they dropped the knife, walked into the kitchen, sat on the floor, and started singing to themselves while rocking back and forth. I was stunned, literally going into shock. I stared at them, bloody tissues in hand, and informed them I was done with this bullshit and was going to wait outside for my parents. They began crying through the song they were singing, still smiling like a maniac. I never went back after that. I broke up with them over the phone about a week later. They sobbed and told me they'd get rid of their souls and that she still loved me. I didn't listen. I just hung up, and that was that. She even dropped out of school. Literally never saw her again after that. Years later, I found out she's dating this friend of hers I also was familiar with as a teenager. Then found out she was cheating on me with them for the entire year I had dated her. I've tried to feel bad for her for years, but honestly, I'm still healing from the several attempts at my life. It's hard to feel bad for an abuser, let alone an attacker. Thanks for letting me get that off my chest. I've been in therapy for this recently and wanted to share it to kind of reflect on it also. I'll leave you with this. If you are ever in an abusive relationship and can get out, please do. If not, please take precautions, call the police, do whatever you have to do, and get yourself somewhere safe. I work at a Sylvan Learning Center as a Spanish tutor. In our plaza, we have a Panera, and as workers, we get free coffee. I'm not a coffee drinker, but my mom is, and she's my boss. And I usually walk and pick up her coffee and whatever I want for lunch. I ate in this Panera frequently, and today was nothing different. As I was waiting in line for my order, a man came up behind me, close enough that I could practically feel his body heat. I had turned around to see a man in about his 50s looming over me. He began to talk about this tree trimming service and handed me a business card. However, I had noticed the name on the card didn't match any of the names on the ordering screen, and it started to bother me a little bit. He began to talk to a lady in front of me, like asking if she knew me, which she said no. Come on. I took a tiny step towards her, to which he took a step too, and was practically talking to the other woman over my shoulder. Eventually, the lady took her order and left, leaving me alone with a guy who asked what my job was. He had asked if the lady or I had worked in the area, to which we both said no, but I had replied, "Oh, I'm a tutor," and he took, if it was even possible, another step closer to me and said, "There's a lot of tutors," which I once again stepped away and said, "Oh, well, I tutor Spanish," to which he started asking a couple intrusive questions about my childhood, assuming I was Hispanic in any way. I am not, just have a love for different cultures, and I believe learning and teaching a language helps the world become a better place. He then went silent when I wouldn't answer any of his questions. He then asked if I would be comfortable with babysitting a kid with special needs. I replied that I took care of my cousin who has Down syndrome when she was younger. He replied with, "Maybe you could come to my house and take care of my 11-year-old son with Down syndrome." And I had replied, "Sorry, I'm about to go off to college," and told him I was studying in Spain. He got very close to my face and said, "Oh well, we can't have that." As soon as he said that, my name was called and I grabbed my food and got out of there as fast as I could. As I said before, I had walked to our Panera and I had checked behind me the entire way back. Stay safe, everyone. I'm not sure if business cards are frequently used as ruses for trafficking, but please be careful. Quick background, I'm male and was 19 years old in this story. When I was a freshman in college, I went to a school and lived in a dorm that was located in a busy city. Parking at this school meant trying to find street parking and having to pay a meter every however many hours. I opted to park at my uncle's apartment complex located a city away in the suburban town I grew up in. I would park at his apartment and take a bus downtown to my school. On weekends, when I wanted my car, I would bus back to the transit center near his apartments and walk back to my car. It was a little under half a mile. One weekend afternoon, I took the bus ride to go fetch my car. After getting off the bus, I started walking to the apartments. I noticed a girl walking a short distance ahead of me. She was probably 5 years older than me. Shortly after I noticed her, she noticed me and she began to walk slower. It didn't take long before I caught up to her. She waited until I was next to her and asked me what time it was. Not thinking anything of it and being polite, I answered. She continued walking with me and we made small talk. At this point, I just thought she was friendly. She informed me that she also lived in the apartments that I was headed to. We continued walking and making small talk until I reached my car. When we got to my car, she started commenting on how nice my car was, which was the first red flag. My car is a '91 Toyota Corolla, and by all accounts, not a very nice car. At this point, she started getting closer to me as I was loading my backpack and items into my car. Her demeanor changed, and I could tell at this point that she was visibly trying to flirt with me. Now, for context, I had a girlfriend at the time who I was very faithful to, so the situation started to feel very uncomfortable. She then asked me if I could come with her to her apartment. I explained I had a girlfriend and couldn't come with her. It was at this point she crossed the line. As I was getting ready to get in my car to leave, she reached forward and grabbed my crotch, asking me if I was sure I didn't want to come back with her. I quickly swatted her hand away and firmly stated no. I quickly got into my car, turned it on, and backed out of the parking space, leaving her standing there bewildered that her forced attempt had failed. I left, confused and uncertain of what had just occurred. Now, it's true this could have just been a lonely girl that wanted company, but the lengths she went to convince me to come back with her leave me unconvinced. For the longest time, I looked at this memory as humorous, but as I have gotten older and pondered it more, I see now how dangerous that situation could have been. I wonder to this day what might have been waiting for me if I stupidly had followed her. My intuition tells me that I may have been mugged by her or possibly other people waiting in her apartment, but maybe I'm just paranoid. Either way, I'm glad I was smart enough to get out of that situation. Me and my friend were just walking in our neighborhood at sunset. It's a pretty safe neighborhood. People are usually outside in the evening walking their dogs and working in the yards. It's not busy per se, but it's not a silent, dark neighborhood that no one walks around. We were having a conversation while walking when an early 2000s green SUV pulls up with an older man and a big yellow lab in the back poking its head out the window nonchalantly. The man matches his car speed to us about 4 feet away and has a big smile while he says something. I didn't hear him, so I said, "Huh?" in an uninterested tone, and kept walking as he followed. He was an older man, maybe in his 50s, with an unnaturally wide-eyed smile. I said, "Where's your dog? Why aren't you walking your dog?" I was so confused. I don't have one," and kept walking. "You want to walk my dog?" I was starting to get really weird vibes at this point, as he still pulled up to the side of us while we were still walking. What kind of question is that? "No," I said. "Come here, I'll give you $20 to walk my dog." I was like, "What the dude? Who are you?" "No, I don't like dogs." I looked at the guy, then my friend, and we were both really getting creeped out by this guy. Every instinct in me was yelling at me to tell this guy to leave us alone and stop following us. "You don't like dogs? Well, do you like cats?" I started looking around for an escape route, and a couple walking their dog rounded the corner of the street we were approaching. At this point, we were both extremely freaked out and just want to get the hell away from this guy. Why is he following us? Why is he asking these weird-ass questions? I told myself if he asked one more question, I was going to respond with a "leave us alone." I saw my chance to get away from the situation. "Well, I'll give you $20 to take my dog for a walk. It's $20. We ignore him, and I immediately decided to change routes and turned us around. As we start to walk near the other couple with their dog, we hear him say to his lab, "And if you look over here, you'll see another dog." All while still smiling in a smooth, rehearsed manner. We kept looking back to see if he was following us, but he rounded the corner and left. I have no idea what this man's intentions were, but they were not innocent. Why are you pulling up to pedestrians, trying to pawn your dog off? Why are you following us? Why aren't you taking social cues of disinterest and nose and leave us alone? This was an extremely weird interaction of him trying to get us to come to his car and interact with his dog. Nothing about this felt normal or just friendly conversation. His motive was trying to get us back to his vehicle. We have no idea if he had a passenger with a gun or weapon to try and mug or kidnap us. Maybe he was just crazy. And that, dear listeners, brings a close to these true creepy encounters. If you are sleeping, I hope Slumberland is treating you kindly. If you are awake, I hope you've enjoyed this collection. In the meantime, please take care of yourselves. I'll be reading to you soon. Have yourself a good morning, a good afternoon, or a good night.